Hello everyone, and welcome to SIPTEC's Simulation Scenario Template Tutorial. This presentation will guide you through the completion of our recently designed Simulation Scenario Template. If you haven't downloaded the template yet, please go to the SIPTEC webpage and download this free resource. Let's get started. We would like to recognize and thank the members of the Scenario Template Task Force for their time, effort, expertise, creativity, and commitment to this project. We hope that this template will help both academicians and clinicians with varying experience in simulation to develop detailed simulation scenarios based on healthcare simulation standards of best practice. We also expect this template to facilitate collaboration with colleagues by enabling simulation educators to easily share effective simulation scenarios. It is our ultimate goal to use this template as the basis of a searchable simulation library. Now, let's take a look at the template. The template has been designed to facilitate scenario development in an evidence-based and practical way. There are 6 sections to complete. Let's take a look at each one in turn. Section 1 of the template includes demographic information related to the simulation. Let's take a closer look. The scenario title is simply a name that you give to your simulation so that you can identify it. This sim is called Case 2.3, AFib/CVA. The brief scenario description is a brief description of the scenario that the students will be participating in. Think of this as an abstract so that if another educator were looking at it, they could read the statement and know if the scenario would fit their learners' needs. Take a look at the example given here. The next few areas are pretty self-explanatory. Document whether this scenario is interprofessional. Then document the intended target audience. Next, describe the content area and the scenario setting. In this simulation, third-year DPT students will participate in a simulation with a cardiovascular and neurological focus in the acute rehabilitation setting. Next, document the dimensions of fidelity that are most important in this scenario. Remember that as you go through this form, many terms are defined for you. If you are unsure of the definition of a term, please consult the Healthcare Simulation Dictionary. A link to this free online resource can be found at the top of the template. In this case, the students will be participating in a classroom-based simulation, so the physical and environmental fidelity are not as important as the psychological fidelity. In other words, the educators here are more concerned with how the simulation feels than how it looks. The next section is keywords. You can leave this blank for now. This section will be modified as the scenario library is developed. And finally, document how long you expect a single simulated encounter to take and the suggested patient-to-learner ratio. In this simulation, the students have 15 to 20 minutes for their intervention session. This does not include the prebrief or the debrief. And this is a group activity. There are 2 students that will tag in and out for every patient. And there are 7 to 10 observing learners. Section 2 of the scenario template is extremely important. This is where you input the broad purpose of the simulation as well as your learning objectives. It starts with the educational rationale. You may choose to input your course learning objectives here as the educational rationale, or you may adapt the brief description from Section 1. Take a look at the example provided here. This next section focuses on the learning objectives for this simulation-based learning experience. These objectives should guide the development of the rest of your case scenario. Now, we've included some basic information directly in the template to help you craft well-written learning objectives. Here's an example of one of the objectives for this case. Following the activity, learners will be able to develop and implement an aerobic endurance program post-CVA using FIT principles. Below, you should document the observable actions that let you know whether the students met this objective. Your scenario should be focused on a small number of learning objectives that can be achieved in the time allotted. 2 to 4 objectives is perfect. Some observable actions may not actually happen during the simulated scenario, but they will be key points during the debriefing session. Section 3 is related to the pre-brief and preparatory materials for the simulation. There are many different ways of pre-briefing. In this case, students participate in a pre-briefing session as a large group. This is a sample of the PowerPoint used during that classroom session. Active learners receive more specific patient information so that they can prepare an appropriate plan of care for their simulated session. For example, active learners receive this clinical synopsis as well as parts of the medical record to review 1 week in advance of the simulation. We encourage you to attach all relevant pre-briefing materials in this section. A link to a pre-brief checklist is provided in the template to help you develop this section further. Section 4 provides the details needed to set up all materials for your simulation. So the first section is fairly self-explanatory. In this simulation, we're using a simulated patient. We then must provide the additional details needed to set the stage. Remember, you only need to check the information that is relevant to your case. Depending on your setting, inpatient, outpatient, or other, you'll complete the subsection relevant to your case. We're going to continue to use the inpatient setting as an example. This section may seem overwhelming at first because we really wanted to provide all items that might be included in your simulation. Please select only the items needed for your case. Items are ordered alphabetically, and there's a place to add additional items if you don't find what you need on this list. For every item that you are checking, please enter the appropriate code, which indicates the availability and setup of each item. In this case, there's a pulse oximeter and BP cuff available in the room, ready to use, but not attached to the patient. Therefore, R was documented for those items. Take a look at the rest of the equipment required for this simulation. Please note the additional equipment in the comments box. While some of this may be available in other subsections, we ask that you only complete the subsection for your scenario setting, in this case, inpatient. Section 5 is related to the clinical context for the scenario. First, provide a case summary and case stem. The case summary is for the facilitators and briefly describes how the case progresses and any major events that occur during the scenario. The case stem is for the learners. It's the handoff that you give to the learners to get them to start the scenario. So in this scenario, the active learners have already had the information about the case in order to prepare their plan of care. Their case stem is the patient being wheeled into the gym by the PT aide. The observing learners receive a brief HPI so that they understand the background of the case. Next, provide further details about the patient. Again, you only need to complete the sections that are relevant to your simulation. For example, in this scenario, the gender of the patient is not pertinent to the case, so it is intentionally left blank. The simulated patient can either be a male or a female, depending on the actor playing the part. Feel free to pause here to review the rest of the patient information for this case. Provide baseline vitals for this patient, if appropriate, and then provide information about how the simulated patient should present in response to assessment. In this case, the neurological, cardiovascular, and musculoskeletal systems are involved, as is affect, behavior, cognition, and functional ability. Provide additional details in the boxes on the right. For example, for functional ability, this patient presents with decreased balance, affecting independence with functional movement. Pause again if you want to look at further details about how this case was described. Document anything that will be provided in the patient's medical record. Since this is an acute rehabilitation scenario, the students will not have access to lab values or special test results. However, active participants will receive the PT initial evaluation and the Berg balance test results. Now, this may seem repetitive, but this is where you're writing out information that you are providing to your simulated patient. Notice that the case summary is written as if you are telling the simulated patient pertinent case information that will help them portray this patient accurately. Each scenario may or may not include an opening line and challenge questions. In this case, there's no specific opening line, but the simulated patient will ask, "When will I be back to normal?" at some point during the encounter. Additional scripted lines can be listed under Other. This is continuing information for the simulated patient about scripted questions and answers. Again, not all sections need to be filled out. This will be scenario specific. This section provides details for participants that are not the student or the simulated patient. This can include nurses, family members, etc. This is a classroom-based simulation with several observer learners. The PT aide plays a role in injecting humor into the scenario to keep the observers engaged, while at the same time distracting the physical therapist student actively participating in the case. Section 6 serves as the storyboard for the facilitator. It helps facilitators understand the flow of the scenario, including any points that might trigger responses or critical actions by the learner or the simulated patient. For example, if the physical therapist student doesn't take resting vitals, the simulated patient is instructed to become short of breath and complain of being really tired and sweaty. It would be helpful for you to read the notes provided in the template and refer to those definitions and descriptions when completing this section. This chart is not meant to be a minute-by-minute relay of what should happen during the scenario. This is designed to help propel the scenario forward using key points and objectives. If your scenario had a specific action that the participant must do in order to meet learning objectives, you might need to include a specific trigger. In this scenario, if the student doesn't take baseline vitals, there is no trigger. It's just discussed later in the debrief. However, you could revise this scenario and include a trigger of the patient saying, "Are you sure this activity is safe for me?" to provide a hint to the students to check vital signs. There are many different ways to perform debriefing. Section 7 allows you to document your debriefing method or any key points that you include during your debrief. There are several references provided here if you would like more information about debriefing. For this case, there are 4 specific key points that debriefers must address during the debriefing session to ensure that all students meet the learning objectives for the case. In addition, you may document any assessment or outcome measures used to assess student performance, learning, attitudes, confidence, etc. This scenario is designed to be formative and therefore does not have a specific outcome assessment of student learning. Finally, please include any references used to develop this particular scenario and attach any relevant materials. Please note that the attachment section works well for images and links, but you cannot attach full files to the template at this time. Thanks for being with us today. We hope that you take the time to look through and complete this template. Please use the web link or QR code to provide us with feedback, as this is an evolving document. Please see our website for upcoming Q&A sessions and other events, programming, and resources related to simulation.